Welcome back to the Story of Liberty. This is your host, John Bona. Let's talk about God and His creation for a few minutes. Now let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, that God did create the earth and He has fixed laws over it. We call that the laws of nature. But then He just withdrew. He left and He went off somewhere, and He is not presiding over the earth. He is not governing the earth. Folks, that is one scary thought, and let me share with you why. So, what guarantee would we have that someday the world would not be entirely destroyed? Remember, Scripture tells us the wind blows where it pleases to blow, so man can not harness it or determine where the wind goes. Sometimes the wind will even become a hurricane or a tornado with huge volume and velocity. I've lived through a few of those back in 1992, Hurricane Andrew in South Florida, and then in Central Florida with Hurricanes Francis and Jean. And I can tell you, if you've ever been in one of those, you get a feeling of the magnitude of wind. So, what assurance do we have against such calamities? We've heard about constant flooding in parts of the world and fires, and as we know, man is basically helpless before them. And Science cannot devise a means to prevent clouds from bursting forth into tornadoes and hurricanes. So how do we know that these clouds will not be multiplied indefinitely, and the whole earth would be deluged with the downpour like in the time of Noah? Could that be repeated? Well, we know that won't. God gave His promise with the rainbow, didn't He? That He would never flood the entire earth again. That's His promise. But we know every couple years there's some, let's call it natural catastrophe. An area could be literally swept out of existence. We've seen that with the tsunamis. What can man do? What can man do if a giant mammoth earthquake destroyed a big part of an area? We know from science that the subterranean fires beneath the comparatively thin crust of our earth. What if these fires burst forth and consumed an entire country? Well, we see that consolidated into one area now and then with a huge volcano, like the one at Mount St. Helens, an enormous eruption. So what is the point we're making here today at the Story of Liberty? The point we're seeking is deny that God is governing matter. Hebrews 1:3 tells us that He is upholding all things by the word of His power. Surely God does govern matter, inanimate matter. He governs everything, in fact. It's clearly shown in His divine revelation. God said, remember, let there be light. And then we read, there was light. God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together. And what happened? He said, let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, herbs, seeds, fruit trees, fruit after its kind upon the earth. And it was so. As the great psalmist declared, He spoke it, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. So after the creation of Adam, many centuries passed before a drop of rain fell upon the earth. Before Noah, there was a time when a mist went up from the earth, and it watered the whole face of the ground. We see that in Genesis 2:6. And then God said, Behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. And in fulfillment of this, we read, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. God's power is absolute. Over matter, look at Egypt. Look what happened in Egypt when light was turned into darkness, the rivers into blood. Hail fell, and death came down upon the godless land of Pharaoh. Even Pharaoh was compelled to cry out for deliverance. Look at the absolute control God has over the elements. When Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, the fire ran along the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt, the land of Pharaoh. Very grievous. None like it in the land of Egypt before. But interesting, only in the land of Goshen, where God's children of Israel were, was there no hail. See, this distinction happens over and over. And this happened again when Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Think of that for a minute. These aren't isolated cases either. We see this all throughout Scripture. God is in control of matter. Think about when God sent his only Son, when Christ was incarnated in that small town of Bethlehem. Think about his life when he was asleep in the boat and the storm came there on the Sea of Galilee. The winds were roaring and the waves were bouncing up there, and the disciples had fear that they would capsize. But what happened? He arose, he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." The wind stopped, and there was a great calm. We're told in the book of Mark 4:39. At his word, the fig tree withered. At his touch, disease fled instantly away. And yes, even the galaxy, the universe, is ruled by our Maker to perform his pleasure. Take 2 illustrations. Remember when God decided to let the sun go back 10 degrees on the dial to help the faith of Hezekiah? Do you remember that? Do you remember when God caused a star to herald the incarnation of Christ the Lord? The star appeared to the wise men of the east. This star, we read in Scripture, went before them till it came and stopped. It stood over where the young child Jesus was in Matthew 2:9. God gives rain to where he will give rain, to where he wills. I enjoy hearing about the weather forecasts, but how frequently God changes their calculations. They're not always right. Sometimes they are. And not to say anything negative about weather forecasts, it's probably a hard thing to do. But God knows when the storm is coming. God governs inanimate matter. The earth, air, fire, water, hail, snow, stormy winds, and the rough seas all perform the word of His power and fulfill His sovereign pleasure. So we clearly see that God does govern matter. He governs the earth and the air, the fire and the water, the hail, the snow, the sleet, the stormy winds, the stormy seas are under His sovereign power. And you know what this made me realize, this short study? When we complain about the weather, we are murmuring against God. So the next time you're just having some conversation with a friend and they start complaining, oh, how hot it is, or how cold it is, or when is this rain going to stop, remind them that God is in control and we should not murmur against Him. God bless you.